your number one risk for 2025 is the G0 wins. You're saying the apex predator is the United States. They're in a good position. Appeasement wins. There's conversations before Trump even enters the White House for a second time about him wanting to reclaim the Panama Canal, him wanting to buy Greenland, him suggesting and floating the possibility of Canada becoming the 51st state. What do you make of those conversations that we're even having before he's sworn in?
And we're going to have a lot more of them. Well, first of all, a lot of what he is saying is very similar to what Russia was saying about Ukraine in 2022 and in 2014. Now, the United States is obviously a lot more powerful than Russia. And I don't expect that U.S. tanks are going to roll across the border into Canada anytime soon, nor do I think the Americans would take Greenland by force. And keep in mind that, Denmark, and therefore Greenland, which is a part of Denmark, at least for now, is an ally, a NATO ally of the United States. But what I do believe is that Trump has a very different worldview than the Americans have been led by for the past 35 years, since the Cold War was over, since the wall came down in 1989. For much of that period, American leadership was about collective security around the world, the U.S. being the principal sheriff. It was about free trade and the United States promoting institutions and rule of law that would allow for borders to be easier for goods and services and capital to flow. And also the United States to promote common values and democracy all over the world. Now, I am not arguing that the United States did that consistently or always did it well. I'm not trying to argue the U.S. has never been hypocritical in the way it's applied those rules. Of course, we know those things are not true. But nonetheless, other countries around the world accepted that that was what the United States was, at least in principle, trying to stand up for. And, when the U.S. was working with China, becoming the second most powerful country in the world, they would tell China, we're going to help integrate you into a U.S.-led global system, but we expect you to be a responsible stakeholder. In other words, you're going to have to politically reform to be more like us. You're going to have to economically reform to support the private sector in a free market. And furthermore, you're going to have to accept greater accountability inside the institutions that we have created. And of course, China did not do that. China became much wealthier, but they became more consolidated as an authoritarian regime, a dictatorship under Xi, and also more state capitalist and squeezing the private sector. Now, what I'm saying, and what I think is extremely interesting about this moment, is not only has China not accepted the old American worldview, but increasingly the Americans are actually accepting a worldview which is more Chinese. And what I mean by that is that the United States is saying we reject this order that we put together. We don't want to be the global sheriff. We don't want the collective security. We sure as hell don't want free trade. We're not going to promote democracy all over the world. We will work with any country. We don't care if they're a democracy or if they're a dictatorship. Doesn't matter to us. We're willing to do a deal with them. It's transactional. Right? And we're more powerful, so we want to do that deal with them one-on-one. We don't want to work with Europe together. We want to work with countries individually because we'll then get what we want. So it's not about rule of law globally. It's about us doing what we're interested in for the United States. So an America First policy is actually very deeply aligned with a G0 world. And that is what we're talking about here.